Do you believe that in an efficient market, there's always going to be about 50% of the buyers and 50% of the sellers on either side of the marketplace? Well, with Uniswap V3, we get to see that data. And I think this video will be very interesting to you. We've got some interesting LP data to look at. We're going to take a look at the Hedron USDC pair on Uniswap V3. We're going to take a look at, and you can't see this data on V2, which is awesome for V3. I don't know why more people just don't use V3. It's so much better than V2. We're going to take a look at Hex Hedron pair on V3. We're going to also take a look at Hedron and wrapped ETH, right? The top three pairs for Hedron on V3. And it's pretty interesting. At least I find it interesting. So I figured I would do a video and share it with you guys. But first, if this is your first time here, what's good? My name is Sam. And for those of you who are returning, it's good to see you. If you'd like to support the channel, you can check out some links down below. Say what's up on Instagram or on Twitter, right over there. A lot more fitness related stuff on Instagram. Okay. So if you agree with the premise that you're going to have about 50% of the players on one side and 50% of the players on the other side, then in terms of an efficient market, think about what happens. If you don't agree with that, think about what happens when it's not even. Let's take the housing market. If you have more buyers than you have sellers, what happens to the price? You don't have to be super smart to figure this one out. Price goes up. Now, what happens if you have more sellers than buyers? Price goes down. Right? So when you have an efficient market, you're going to have about 50% on either side. It's going to oscillate back and forth, right? But in the long run, in an efficient market, you're going to have 50% and 50% on either side of the market. And it's going to be flowing in one direction, right? Or flowing in the other direction. But what I've been doing with Hedron is tracking that data so we can take a look at it. So we're going to take a look at data from about a week ago, and then we're going to take a look at some data from today. Now, what do we have here? This is from, the 20th of this month, so about a week ago. We have Hedron USDC, Hedron ETH, and Hedron Hex. Now, if we look at these pool sizes, we get to see that there's, $6.5 million of liquidity across these three pools. Cool, right? Well, this pair is a very small pair, right? This is 284,000. These are in thousandths, this pool here, and these are in millions, right? So there's 3.2 million between Hex Hedron over here, and there's 2.9 between USDC and Hedron over here. This is from several days ago. One of the things that was interesting is that all of the pairs were more in the other token, meaning there was less Hedron available on the marketplace, right? Well, what we have seen over this past week since I tracked the data was an increase in the price of Hex. So check out this pool here. We're going to take a look at this pool and understand how some of these mechanics work. Price of Hedron has stayed about the same over the last week. The price of Hex has gone up by more than 50%. And there's people who are selling Hedron to purchase Hex. Check this out. There was 21% of the total pool was in Hedron, and now there's 23%, but the pool size has drastically increased, right? By 1 million, right? So when you see drastically increase in a week, right? 25% in a week is pretty drastic. When you take a look at these other pools, these ones are a little bit different. In these pools, there's more Hedron on the marketplace. Take a look at this. So in USDC pair, we have 2.8 million of liquidity. And let me just show you where this data comes from. If you're not familiar with Dex Screener, I'm going to pull that up right now. It's dexscreener.com. Probably seen it before. This is on the Ethereum network, and we're looking at the Hex Hedron pair over in the top corner. And what you're able to see is that there's $4.2 million of liquidity. This is the combined liquidity between Hex and Hedron. And if you scroll down a little bit, you get to actually see how much Hedron is pooled in this pair, $1 million, right? Which is pretty crazy when you take a look at the data here, because we have one pool that is looking different than all the other pools here. Let's scroll back down here so we could take, so we could take a look at this. In the USDC pool, right, there's 2.8 million total liquidity. 1.6 of that is Hedron, and 1.2 of it is USDC. Right, so 57% of the pool is Hedron. In the wrapped ETH, so this is the small pool, we have 86% of the pool right here, 288,000 of the 334,000 is Hedron. Right, there's only 13% of ETH in that pool. So how are these things going to change? Well, what we just described earlier, these numbers in an efficient market are always going to sit around 50-50. Now they can obviously oscillate. We looked at this, right? We get to see that Hedron is on the lower side, meaning there's less of it in the pool, there's less of it in the pool, and there's less of it in the pool, right? This pool is pretty small, and this pool has had a 12% or 13% swing, right? From 54% Hedron in the pool to 57% Hedron in the pool, right? So 1.3 million to 1.6 million in this pool here. Pool size has stayed about the same. That means it's been converted from one to the other. How do these things play out? Well, let's run through an example. If you're providing liquidity, and because you got to look at it from multiple angles, right? First, are you providing liquidity, and then people who are going to be coming in to provide liquidity, right? So if you're providing liquidity, and if the microphone here is the current price, and we're all on one side, meaning we all have USDC or we all have Hedron, what happens? Assuming this person wants to continue to provide liquidity, if they're all on Hedron, they're going to come out here, they're going to hold their position, they're going to swap it, so it's 50-50 or something thereabouts, and they're going to now have this position that was 100% Hedron, and now it's going to be 50-50. And then they can put it back into the pool. But what effect does that have on the price? Well, think about that for a second, right? If you're all on Hedron, and then you have several players, right, that are all, if the price is moving one way or the other, then they have to get out of the token. Then they need to sell that token down by selling, right? And then enter back into the position, right? And this is going to happen when you have Hex increasing, right? Now, the same thing happens in reverse, right? If they're more USDC, right? If one position was here in terms of V3, you're providing liquidity, Hedron and USDC, and now the prices move, so all you're holding is USDC, right? You pull that position, you swap, so now you're 50-50, let's say. But what does that do? That means you bought Hedron. There's pressure driving the price up there. So I want to understand that piece of it from somebody who's currently providing liquidity. But then you also have people who are going to be entering into providing liquidity. And they're going to be coming from two different sources. People in the ecosystem, right? People who own Hedron or own Hex, right? Those people are going to be like, okay, let me provide liquidity. But then there's going to be people who are like, oh, let me bring in some fresh capital and I will use that to provide liquidity, right? And they can bring that in the form of USDC or Hex, or ETH or anything else, right? And you're going to have two different effects there. If somebody has, say, Hedron and they want to provide liquidity and they already have ETH, cool. Then that's just going to make the price stickier. Or there's going to be more. How I like to think about this is with very limited liquidity, think of yourself as in a track, right? Your track and field, and you've got your running shoes on. You've already done a little warm up, a little teeny bit of active stretching, right? Some dynamic stretching. You're ready to go, right? And the track is one of those newer tracks. It's like rubbery, so it gives you a little bit of bounce, right? And you can move very, very quick. Now, that's what it's like when you have no liquidity. You are a metaphor for the price action. When there's very little liquidity, those are ideally perfect situations for the price to move, right? You've got your running shoes on. You've done some dynamic stretching or active stretching. You've done a little bit of warm up. You've been practicing for weeks, right? You know that you can run faster, right? Now, when somebody goes through and they provide liquidity, so they come to the market, whether they're sitting on the sidelines on Hex or sitting on the sidelines of, hey, let me bring in new capital. What ends up happening? Well, let's take that ideal scenario where you're running on a track. And instead of running on a track now, maybe you're running in the grass and then more liquidity is added. Okay. Well, let's say that you're running in maybe like 6 inches of water, right? There's 6 inches of water. You could still run pretty fast, but you got to slightly pay more attention, and maybe you're not going as fast because you still have to step on the water and you're making big splashes. Everything's getting wet, right? Well, you add even more liquidity. And now it's like running through water that is knee height, right? You slow down in the knee height water. And remember, you, in this example, are a metaphor for the price action. So the more liquidity in there, the thicker that is, then the less the price can move around because there's so much more liquidity around those things. So let's take a look back here for a second and see what we notice here. Well, we get to see here that there's a lot more Hedron in these pools, USDC and Wrapped ETH. Wrapped ETH is like a smaller amount, right? Like this pool is a fairly small amount. It's just these are the top 3 pools on V3 for Hedron, so I pulled it out. But in reality, there's 4.2 million in Hex Hedron, and there's 2.8 in USDC. So like the Hedron ETH pool is pretty small, right? In comparison, like, 10x smaller than Hex Hedron and nearly 10x smaller than Hedron USDC. But what will happen is, well, this one's pretty close. Like this isn't too far off, but this is going to adjust. This is going to adjust closer to 50-50. At some point, this is going to adjust for 50-50. Now, in that example, right, we have Hex is 3.2 million and Hedron is 1 million, right? So if there's players now, actually, let's pull this up real quick. I'm glad I thought of this. We're going to go to uniswap.fish. This is a calculator that will give us some more information in a visual form in terms of a histogram or a graph, right? So let's take a look at this. We're taking a look at the Hex Hedron 1% pair here. Nothing crazy. This is the buy wall that was put on by Alex, I believe. So nothing absolutely insane when we take a look at this. Let's change this to the 0.3% pair and see if there's what's going on over here. Okay, nothing crazy over here either. But what did we just learn? That a lot of that liquidity is sitting outside of the market. Right, a lot of that. Let me go back to that for 1 second so you get to see this. See this over here? This is primarily Hex that's being, this tall line here, this is primarily Hex that's being held to sell, like, right? This is 21,584 Hex, right, for this over here. So this is a Hex position that's being waiting to be sold. This is basically a range order here, right? So they're trying to sell their Hex for Hedron at that price right there. When we go to the 1% pair, it's a little different because we have all of this over here, right? Because, and the reason that there's not any Hedron in this pair, right? You get to see that the Hedron's basically staying the same. It's probably really hard to see, but the white numbers above where I'm actually looking. Let me see if we can zoom in a little bit. No, it's not working. Okay. There's barely any Hedron in these pools because it has already moved through the price of these, right? So there's a bunch of dead liquidity that unless Alex moves it, it's just going to sit there. It's going to sit there and it's going to sit there unless he takes it out and adjusts it, either adjusts it or just pulls the liquidity altogether, which means that the liquidity for, oh wow, this is way bigger than what I'm at, just adjusted. Hopefully you guys can see that now. This is way less liquidity than what these numbers actually represent. So let me go back over here because people are not looking at this. So that means that what pair was that we were in? I think there was the Hex pair, Hedron. Okay, so let's take a look at Hedron and US. Let's see here. Let's pull this back up. Hedron and ETH, even though this is a smaller pool. Let's see how this pair looks. Almost all the liquidity is here. Okay, this is exactly what I was talking about. 50% of the market on one side, 50% of the market on the other side. This is like the price has moved. If you haven't been paying attention, the price has moved slightly. So the pink line was closer over to here, and the pink line has moved. That's the market price, right? So normally it's not like how it is right here. Let's take a look at one more pool, the USDC pair, and see how that LP looks. Okay. So this looks, again, nothing crazy here to understand what's going on in here. But we did look at those other two pools in Hex and Hedron, and we know that those are super lopsided. It's not exactly an accurate representation when you look at the numbers. And that's why I wanted to talk about that, cover that in this video, because not many people are talking about this kind of stuff. They'll just look at there's this much liquidity between Hex and Hedron, or there's this much liquidity between XYZ and ABC, right? Now you know how to look into it a little bit deeper to understand what is going on. Does this mean the price is going to move in one direction or the other? I think it is. I'm very bullish. You can check out the other video I just did on, I think that Hedron is going to be very bullish. That should be clicking on the icon down below over here and checking out the channel. You can come say hi on Twitter or Instagram right here. If you'd like to support, go on to the links in the description. Appreciate you guys. Talk to you soon.